The Legend of Firefly Mountain. Prologue, The Cosmic Seed. In the swirling darkness between galactic arms, where solar winds whisper ancient secrets across the void, a consciousness stirred. Not a single mind, but a collective awareness that pulsed with the rhythm of creation itself. The universe was young then, stars still forming from primordial gases, planets coalescing from cosmic dust. Earth was nothing more than a molten sphere, cooling slowly in the embrace of its nascent sun. Yet even then, it was marked. The collective that would one day be known as the Omnians perceived reality differently than most sentient beings would eventually evolve to do. They existed simultaneously across multiple planes of existence, perceiving time not as a linear progression but as a tapestry where past, present, and future were merely different threads in the same grand design. From their perspective beyond conventional space-time, they witnessed Earth's potential, a rare convergence of physical and metaphysical conditions that would make it uniquely suited for the emergence of consciousness in its myriad forms. The planet possessed something extraordinary, a living core that generated not only a magnetic field but also a subtle energetic resonance that rippled through dimensions. And so, with intentions inscrutable to lesser beings, the Omnians seeded Earth with a fragment of their collective essence. This seed took root at a point where Earth's energy meridians converged most powerfully, where tectonic forces would eventually thrust upward to form what humans would one day call Firefly Mountain. The seed lay dormant for eons as Earth transformed around it. Continents formed and broke apart. Oceans filled and receded. The first stirrings of life emerged from primordial pools and gradually diversified, filling every available ecological niche with increasingly complex organisms. Through it all, the Omnian seed pulsed quietly beneath the surface, a beacon undetectable to physical senses but profoundly influential on the planet's development. When the age of dinosaurs dawned, the seed's influence subtly guided evolution toward greater neural complexity. Without directly interfering, it created conditions favorable for the development of consciousness, not just awareness, but the capacity for self-reflection, abstract thought, and eventually, civilization. What no being on Earth could know then was that these developments were being observed from afar by ancient, calculating eyes. Eyes that belonged to beings who had mastered interstellar travel when Earth's dominant species were still small, scurrying mammals hiding from predators. Eyes that recognized the unique potential the Omnians had seen in Earth, but with vastly different intentions for its future. The reptilian conquerors were coming. And so began the first chapter in the long and secret history of Earth, a history interwoven with the fate of what would one day be known as Firefly Mountain. Part 1, The Reptilian Conquest. Chapter 1, The Arrival of the Saurians. They came in the time of giants, when massive reptiles dominated Earth's continents and seas. Their ships darkened the skies of the late Cretaceous period, massive crystalline structures that distorted light around them like mirages. The indigenous creatures of Earth had no context for these visitors, no concept of technology or interstellar travel. To them, these were simply new predators arriving in their realm. But these visitors were predators of an entirely different order. The Saurians, as they would later be known in the whispered legends of stars beyond counting, were an ancient spacefaring civilization. Evolved from a species of intelligent reptiles on a distant world circling a dying star, they had long since transcended their biological limitations through a combination of genetic manipulation and cybernetic enhancement. Their original forms, bipedal reptilians standing 3 meters tall with scaled skin of emerald, obsidian, and crimson, had been preserved through countless generations of careful engineering. Their civilization spanned several spiral arms of the galaxy, built upon principles antithetical to those held by most sentient species. Where others sought cooperation, the Saurians revered dominance. Where others valued diversity, the Saurians enforced rigid hierarchies based on genetic caste. Where others might explore for the sake of knowledge, the Saurians conquered for the sake of resource extraction and territorial expansion. Their empire was ancient and patient. They did not merely conquer, they colonized, terraformed, and ultimately transformed worlds to serve their needs over timescales measured in millions of years. Earth, with its diverse biosphere and unique energetic properties, represented a prize of incalculable value. The initial Saurian landing occurred near what would eventually become the base of Firefly Mountain. Their sensors had detected the dormant Omnian seed and the convergence of planetary energy lines at this location. 23 crystalline ships formed a perfect geometric configuration around the mountain, and from them emerged the first wave of colonists, scientist priests of the Communion of Scales, tasked with assessing the planet's potential. These first Saurians moved with deliberate precision, establishing monitoring stations across the globe and collecting specimens of Earth's life forms for analysis. They were particularly interested in the dominant reptilian species, seeing in these creatures distant evolutionary cousins. The scientist priests began immediate experiments, accelerating the evolution of selected dinosaur species through genetic manipulation. Their work was interrupted when their instruments detected something unexpected, traces of Omnian influence permeating Earth's biosphere. The Saurians had encountered the Omnians before, on distant worlds across the galaxy. They recognized the subtle energetic signature and understood its implications. Earth was not simply a resource-rich planet. It was a world marked by one of the most enigmatic and powerful collectives in the known universe. This discovery elevated Earth's importance exponentially in the complex calculations of Saurian imperial strategy. The Dominator Prime of the nearest Saurian Empire promptly dispatched a full colonization fleet, thousands of ships carrying millions of Saurian colonists, warriors, and slaves. Earth was about to become the front line in an ancient cosmic conflict. ###, Chapter 2, The Shadow Empire. The full Saurian colonization force arrived within a solar cycle of the initial landing. Massive ships positioned themselves at strategic points in Earth's orbit, while others descended to establish fortified settlements across the planet's surface. The largest concentration remained centered around what would become Firefly Mountain, where the Saurians began construction of a vast subterranean complex that would serve as their planetary capital. Using technologies incomprehensible to Earth's native life, the Saurians excavated enormous chambers beneath the mountain, reinforcing them with crystalline structures capable of channeling and amplifying Earth's natural energies. The mountain itself was partially hollowed out to accommodate specialized facilities, genetic laboratories, dimensional resonance chambers, and temples dedicated to the Saurian pantheon of cosmic entities they revered as gods. At the center of this complex, directly above the dormant Omnian seed, they constructed the Nexus Throne, a massive crystalline structure from which the appointed Viceroy of Earth could tap directly into the planet's energy grid. From this throne, a succession of Saurian rulers would govern Earth for millions of years, their lifespans artificially extended through genetic manipulation and energetic sustenance drawn from the planet itself. The Saurians' approach to conquest was methodical and multi-layered. Unlike more impulsive species that might simply eradicate native life or exploit natural resources until depleted, the Saurians took a longer view. They saw Earth's biosphere as a complex system that could be harnessed rather than depleted, a living machine that, with proper management, could serve their purposes indefinitely. Their first priority was reshaping Earth's dominant species to serve their needs. Selected dinosaur species were captured and subjected to accelerated evolution through genetic engineering. The most successful experiments produced the servitor clades, reptilian beings of enhanced intelligence who were biochemically conditioned for absolute loyalty to their saurian masters. These servitors became the overseers of Earth's transformation, carrying out the will of the saurians across the planet's surface. Simultaneously, the saurians began manipulating Earth's climate and geography to better suit their physiological preferences. Using orbital arrays to subtly alter solar radiation patterns and deploying atmosphere-modifying technologies at strategic points around the globe, they gradually increased Earth's average temperature and humidity levels. The planet's equatorial regions became particularly hospitable to saurian colonists, who established sprawling city complexes amid engineered jungles teeming with modified flora and fauna. For the saurians, conquest was as much spiritual as physical. They believed that truly controlling a world meant dominating it on every level of existence, material, energetic, and dimensional. To this end, their scientist priests conducted elaborate rituals within specialized chambers beneath Firefly Mountain, attempting to establish what they called sovereignty resonance with the planet's core consciousness. These rituals involved complex geometrical arrangements of crystalline artifacts, precisely calculated sound frequencies, and the sacrifice of genetically engineered beings whose neural patterns had been optimized for maximum dimensional resonance. The mountain's unique properties, particularly its connection to the dormant Omniene seed, made it the ideal focus for these efforts. As centuries passed, the saurian dominion over Earth appeared absolute. Their cities rose above primeval forests, their servitor armies maintained order across the continents, and their scientist priests probed ever deeper into the mysteries of planetary consciousness. The native dinosaur species continued their existence, largely unaware of the intelligent overlords, who now controlled their world's destiny. Yet beneath this apparent stability, resistance was stirring, not from Earth's native life, but from the subtle influence of the Omniene seed, which had begun to awaken in response to the saurians' presence. # Chapter 3, The Awakening Seed. 60 million years into the saurian occupation of Earth, the seemingly perfect imperial system began experiencing inexplicable disruptions. Dimensional resonance chambers beneath Firefly Mountain reported anomalous energy fluctuations. Servitor clades exhibited unprecedented behavioral deviations, including spontaneous disobedience and even rudimentary philosophical questioning. Most alarming to the saurian leadership, the Nexus throne itself began periodically rejecting its occupants, causing physical pain to any viceroy who sat upon it for extended periods. The cause of these disturbances remained elusive to saurian science for decades. Their instruments detected subtle energy shifts emanating from deep beneath the mountain, but the source could not be precisely located or categorized within known phenomena. The Communion of Scales dispatched their most accomplished scientist priests to investigate, but even these experts found themselves confounded by the increasingly erratic behavior of Earth's energy grid. What the saurians could not fully comprehend was that the Omniene seed, dormant since Earth's formation, had begun an awakening process triggered by the very efforts of the saurians to dominate the planet's consciousness. The ritual workings conducted beneath Firefly Mountain had inadvertently provided the energetic catalyst needed for the seed to initiate its next evolutionary phase. As the seed gradually activated, it began subtly influencing all life within its expanding sphere of consciousness. This influence manifested differently depending on the receptivity of each organism, but its most dramatic effects appeared in species with more developed neural systems, particularly the servitor clades and, to the horror of the saurian leadership, some lower caste saurians themselves. The first documented case of what would later be termed consciousness inversion occurred in a mid-level Saurian administrator named Xalath. While supervising a dimensional resonance experiment, Xalath suddenly collapsed, experiencing what witnesses described as violent convulsions followed by a state of suspended animation lasting 17 hours. When Xalath regained consciousness, the administrator's personality had fundamentally transformed. Where before there had been rigid adherence to hierarchical protocols, now there existed philosophical curiosity. Where there had been unquestioning loyalty to the Empire, now there were probing questions about the ethics of planetary domination. Most disturbing to Xalath's superiors was the administrator's claim to have experienced direct communion with what was described as the underlying consciousness of Earth itself during the suspension period. Xalath reported visions of a vastly different potential future for Earth, one where diverse consciousnesses evolved in harmony rather than dominance, where the planet's unique energies were channeled toward collective elevation rather than imperial resource extraction. Xalath was immediately quarantined and subjected to intensive examination by the most senior scientist priests available. Before any conclusions could be reached, 7 more cases of consciousness inversion occurred among Saurians stationed at key points around Firefly Mountain. Within a month, the number had grown to over 100, including 2 members of the ruling High Conclave itself. The Saurian leadership responded with increasing desperation. Affected individuals were subjected to neural recalibration, memory erasure, and in extreme cases, termination and cerebral preservation for study. A containment perimeter was established around Firefly Mountain, with all non-essential personnel evacuated from the region. The mountain complex, once the proud center of Saurian rule on Earth, was redesignated as a quarantine zone under the direct authority of the Dominator Prime. Yet despite these measures, the phenomenon continued to spread. More alarmingly, it began affecting Saurians with no direct contact with previously inverted individuals, suggesting some form of non-local transmission. The scientist priests theorized that Earth's energy grid itself had become a carrier for what they now classified as a consciousness contagion of unknown origin. As the crisis deepened, the most ancient and powerful factions within Saurian society intervened directly. The Eternal Clutch, a council of genetically perfect Saurians whose lineage traced directly to the species' homeworld, dispatched their personal guard to Earth with unprecedented orders. If the contagion could not be contained, Firefly Mountain was to be destroyed, along with the surrounding continental plate if necessary. The stage was set for a confrontation that would alter the course of Earth's history and trigger the next phase in the awakening of the Omni consciousness that had seeded the planet eons before. ###Chapter 4, The Omni Emergence. The Eternal Clutch's intervention force arrived on Earth with technology even more advanced than that employed by the regular Saurian colonization effort. Their flagship, a massive structure of living crystal that seemed to exist partly in dimensions beyond conventional space-time, positioned itself directly above Firefly Mountain. From this vessel descended the Clutch's emissaries, 12 perfect specimens of Saurian genetic engineering, their scaled bodies adorned with intricate biotech augmentations that pulsed with internal light. These emissaries established a specialized containment field around the mountain and began systematic analysis of the consciousness contagion. Their findings shocked even these elite representatives of Saurian knowledge. The phenomenon affecting their kind was not simply a localized anomaly or even a planetary defense mechanism. It was the awakening of something far older and more profound than Saurian civilization itself. Deep beneath Firefly Mountain, the dormant Omni seed had developed into what the emissaries' instruments registered as a dimensional bloom, a structure existing simultaneously across multiple planes of reality, gradually expanding its influence through Earth's energy grid. This bloom was not merely affecting neural patterns. It was fundamentally altering the quantum substrate upon which consciousness itself was built within its sphere of influence. The implications were staggering. If allowed to continue expanding, this bloom would eventually transform all consciousness on Earth, and potentially beyond, into a pattern incompatible with Saurian imperial philosophy. It would not destroy their minds, but instead fundamentally change how they perceived reality, eroding the conceptual foundations of hierarchy, dominance, and separate identity upon which their entire civilization was constructed. The Eternal Clutch's directive was clear: this threat must be eliminated, regardless of cost. Preparations began for a dimensional severance operation that would isolate and extract the portion of reality containing the bloom, effectively removing it from Earth's timeline altogether. Such an operation had never been attempted on a planetary scale before, and its consequences were impossible to predict fully, but the alternative, allowing the bloom to continue expanding, was deemed unacceptable. What the Saurians failed to anticipate was that the awakening Omni consciousness was not merely a passive force being acted upon. It was an ancient intelligence with capabilities far beyond Saurian understanding, and it had been gradually integrating with Earth's consciousness throughout the millions of years of Saurian occupation. As the Eternal Clutch's emissaries initiated their dimensional severance protocol, activating a network of reality warping devices positioned around Firefly Mountain, the Omni bloom responded. The mountain itself began to pulse with visible energy, sheets of multicolored light rippling across its surface and extending upward into the atmosphere. The ground trembled not with tectonic movement, but with something more fundamental, as if the fabric of reality itself was vibrating. At this crucial moment, something unprecedented occurred. The consciousness inversions that had been affecting individual Saurians suddenly accelerated exponentially. Every Saurian within 1,000-kilometer radius of Firefly Mountain simultaneously collapsed, their minds overwhelmed by direct contact with the fully awakening Omni consciousness. When they regained awareness hours later, they were transformed. Though physically unchanged, they no longer identified as Saurians or considered themselves subjects of the Empire. They described themselves as the Awakened and spoke of a profound connection to Earth and to each other, a form of collective consciousness that preserved individual identity while transcending the boundaries between self and other. Most significantly, these awakened Saurians possessed knowledge they could not possibly have acquired through conventional means, including complete understanding of the dimensional severance technology the Eternal Clutch had deployed. Working with unprecedented coordination, they seized control of the emissary's equipment and modified it to serve a different purpose altogether. Rather than severing the Omni bloom from reality, they used the technology to create a protective dimensional pocket around Firefly Mountain, a space where the bloom could continue developing without directly affecting the rest of the planet. This would contain the immediate spread of consciousness inversion while allowing the Omni emergence to proceed unhindered within its protected space. The Eternal Clutch's flagship attempted to intervene, firing weapons that distorted the fundamental forces of physics at the mountain. But the Awakened had anticipated this response and expanded their dimensional pocket to envelop these attacks, channeling their destructive energy into further reinforcement of the pocket's boundaries. For 7 days and nights, this stalemate continued, the most powerful faction of the Saurian Empire bringing its full technological might to bear against a mountain protected by their own transformed kin. On the 8th day, the conflict reached its climax when the flagship attempted a desperate measure, a controlled singularity meant to collapse the dimensional pocket along with everything it contained. What happened next would be debated by Saurian scholars for millennia to come. Witnesses described the mountain as momentarily disappearing from conventional perception, replaced by a column of light that extended beyond the atmosphere. When visibility returned seconds later, both the mountain and the flagship were gone, along with every awakened Saurian on the planet's surface. In their place remained a perfectly circular lake of impossible depth, its waters exhibiting strange properties that defied conventional analysis. Instruments directed at this lake detected no bottom, instead reporting increasing dimensional distortion with depth, as if the lake were a portal leading somewhere beyond normal space-time. The Omnianes had fully awakened, and in doing so, had taken a portion of Earth's consciousness with them into another realm of existence, along with those Saurians whose minds had been sufficiently transformed to accompany them. Firefly Mountain, the focal point of this transformation, had become something else entirely, a dimensional threshold between worlds. For the remaining Saurian colonial administration, this development represented an unprecedented crisis. Their most sacred site on Earth had vanished, along with their most elite leadership. The consciousness contagion appeared to have been contained for the moment, but the planet's energy grid had been fundamentally altered in ways their science could barely comprehend. Most concerning of all, the partial awakening of Earth's consciousness had created a precedent that threatened the very foundation of Saurian control. If Earth itself could produce phenomena capable of transforming Saurian minds, then their dominion over the planet was far more tenuous than previously believed. In the aftermath of what would come to be called the Omnian emergence, the Saurian Empire on Earth entered a period of instability and internal conflict that would ultimately lead to the next great transformation in the planet's secret history. ###Chapter 5, The Great Cataclysm. In the aftermath of the Omnian emergence, the Saurian Empire on Earth entered a prolonged period of internal strife. The loss of Firefly Mountain, their primary power center, combined with the disturbing implications of the consciousness inversions, created deep ideological divisions among the remaining leadership. Two primary factions emerged, the Continuity Clutch, who advocated maintaining imperial control through increased technological domination of Earth's systems, and the Harmony Seers, a growing minority who had been partially affected by the Omnian influence and believed a fundamental reconsideration of Saurian presence on Earth was necessary. For nearly 5 million years, these factions engaged in increasingly destructive conflicts across the planet's surface. The Continuity Clutch deployed ever more invasive technologies to suppress Earth's awakening consciousness, including massive crystalline arrays positioned at key nodes of the planetary energy grid to disrupt any further Omnian manifestations. The Harmony Seers, meanwhile, established hidden communities in remote regions, developing alternative approaches to coexistence with Earth's evolving systems. Throughout this period, Earth's native life continued to evolve, largely oblivious to the struggle being waged by their technological overlords. The dinosaurs remained the dominant vertebrate life forms, though their evolution had been subtly shaped by millions of years of Saurian genetic influence. Then came the turning point, a convergence of cosmic and terrestrial factors that would reshape Earth's history irrevocably. Approximately 66 million years after the initial Saurian colonization, astronomical observations detected a massive asteroid on a collision course with Earth. Under normal circumstances, Saurian technology could easily have diverted such a threat. However, the ongoing civil conflict had left their defensive systems fragmented and poorly maintained. More significantly, the two factions interpreted the approaching impact very differently. The Continuity Clutch viewed the asteroid as an opportunity to reset Earth's increasingly rebellious biosphere. Their models predicted that a major extinction event would eliminate most existing species, allowing them to rebuild Earth's ecosystems from the ground up with fully engineered life forms better suited to Saurian needs. They made the fateful decision not only to allow the impact but to subtly alter the asteroid's trajectory to maximize its destructive potential. The Harmonisiers detected this intervention and recognized it as the existential threat it was. Unable to directly prevent the impact due to their inferior numbers and resources, they instead focused on the desperate alternative strategy, using their understanding of Earth's energetic systems to create protective enclaves where selected species could survive the coming catastrophe. As the asteroid approached its final descent, both factions implemented their respective plans. The Continuity Clutch positioned themselves in hardened shelters deep beneath Earth's surface, particularly concentrated in what would later become the Southern Hemisphere. The Harmonisiers established biodomes in strategically selected locations, particularly focusing on regions where Earth's energy grid remained strongest after the loss of Firefly Mountain. The impact, when it came, exceeded even the Continuity Clutch's calculated predictions. The asteroid struck with such force that it created what would later be identified as the Chicxulub crater, sending superheated material around the globe, igniting continent-wide wildfires, and generating tsunamis of unprecedented scale. Dust and aerosols thrown into the upper atmosphere blocked sunlight for years afterward, creating a prolonged impact winter that devastated Earth's ecosystems. The resulting extinction event eliminated approximately 75% of all species on the planet, including most dinosaurs. Only those within the Harmonisiers' protective enclaves and a few naturally resilient species, particularly small mammals, certain reptiles, birds themselves evolved from dinosaurs, and various marine organisms, survived the initial catastrophe and its aftermath. For the Saurian Empire on Earth, the cataclysm proved even more decisive than anticipated. The Continuity Clutch's shelters, while technologically advanced, had not been designed to withstand the full magnitude of the impact's consequences. Tectonic disturbances compromised many of their structures, while electromagnetic pulses generated by the impact disabled critical life support systems in others. Those that remained intact found themselves isolated from each other and from their orbital support network, which had been severely damaged by debris. The Harmonisiers fared somewhat better, having distributed their resources more widely and integrated their systems more thoroughly with Earth's natural processes. However, they too suffered grievous losses, with more than half their enclaves failing in the years following the impact. In the post-impact world, the remnants of both Saurian factions found themselves in a transformed environment, where their former dominance was unsustainable. The Continuity Clutch's surviving members, faced with limited resources and damaged technology, gradually abandoned their imperial ideology in favor of basic survival. Over generations, they retreated to isolated strongholds, primarily in deep undersea trenches and within the hollow remains of their largest ships, now permanently grounded. The surviving Harmonisiers took a different approach. Having already embraced a philosophy of integration with Earth's systems, they adapted more readily to the new conditions. Over thousands of years, they gradually modified their physical forms to better suit the post-impact environment, becoming smaller and less energy-intensive than their imperial ancestors. Some lineages abandoned technology almost entirely, evolving into what would eventually become known in human mythology as dragons and other reptilian beings of legend, intelligent but reclusive creatures who retained fragmentary memories of their species' former glory. Most significantly for Earth's future development, neither faction retained the capacity to prevent the rise of new dominant species. With the dinosaurs largely eliminated, evolutionary niches opened for the small, fur-bearing mammals that had survived in the margins of the Saurian Empire. These creatures, already possessing adaptations suitable for the post-impact climate, began diversifying into forms that would eventually occupy every available ecological role. Among these survivors were the early primates, arboreal mammals whose complex social structures and developing oral systems carried the subtle imprint of millions of years of exposure to the edges of omniany influence. Though neither they nor any observers at the time could have known it, these unassuming creatures carried within them the seeds of the next great chapter in Earth's consciousness evolution. Meanwhile, at the site where Firefly Mountain had once stood, the dimensional lake remained, a perfectly circular body of water that reflected the sky above but revealed nothing of what lay beneath its surface. Around its shores, strange phenomena continued to manifest, lights that moved with apparent intelligence, temporal anomalies where time flowed differently than in surrounding areas, and occasional glimpses of structures that appeared and disappeared without explanation. The great cataclysm had ended the age of reptilian dominance on Earth's surface. But beneath the visible transformations of the biosphere, more profound changes were unfolding in the fabric of reality itself, changes set in motion by the omniany emergence and accelerated by the asteroid impact's massive energetic discharge. Earth was entering a new phase of its development, one in which the boundaries between dimensions had been permanently altered. And in the spaces between conventional reality, the omnianays were preparing for their eventual return. # Part 2, The Flight of the Omnianays. # Chapter 6, The Dimensional Exodus. When Firefly Mountain vanished during the confrontation between the awakened Saurians and the Eternal Clutch, it did not simply cease to exist. Rather, it underwent a profound transformation, a translation from conventional physical reality into what the omnianays called the interstitial realm, a dimension existing in the spaces between more stable realities. This translation was neither accidental nor unforeseen. It represented the culmination of a process the omniany seed had initiated upon sensing the approach of the Saurian fleet millions of years earlier. A contingency implementation designed to preserve Earth's developing consciousness from complete domination. The omnianays themselves were not a species in the conventional sense. They were a collective consciousness that had evolved beyond physical form, existing as patterns of energy and information capable of flowing through multiple dimensions simultaneously. Their seeding of planets was not colonization, but rather an act of cosmic gardening, nurturing the development of consciousness throughout the universe in all its diverse manifestations. Earth had been of particular interest to them due to its unique energetic properties, specifically, the unusual resonance pattern of its core, which generated a field conducive to the emergence of what the omnianays termed interwoven consciousness. Minds capable of maintaining individual identity while participating in collective awareness. The Saurian occupation had threatened this developmental potential. Their hierarchical approach to consciousness, treating it as a resource to be harvested and controlled rather than a phenomenon to be nurtured, was fundamentally incompatible with Earth's intended evolutionary path. The omniany seed's awakening was a direct response to this threat, an activation triggered by detecting critically dangerous levels of interference in Earth's consciousness field. When the mountain translated into the interstitial realm, it carried with it several critical components of Earth's developing consciousness ecosystem. 1. The approximately 12,000 awakened Saurians, whose minds had been transformed by contact with the omniany bloom. 2. A significant portion of Earth's energy grid, specifically, the nexus point that had made Firefly Mountain a place of power. 3. Samples of Earth's biosphere captured in the moment of translation, including flora, fauna, and microorganisms from the surrounding region 4. A fragment of Earth's own nascent planetary consciousness, which had begun forming in response to the Omniany influence. These components did not arrive in the interstitial realm as separate entities, but rather as an integrated system, a self-contained biosphere existing in a space where the conventional laws of physics held only partial sway. The mountain itself provided the structural framework for this system, its physical form translated into a more fluid state that could adapt to the shifting conditions of interstitial space. For the awakened Saurians, the translation was experienced as a moment of transcendent clarity. Their consciousness, already transformed by contact with the Omniany bloom, expanded further upon entering the interstitial realm. They retained their individual identities but gained the ability to perceive and communicate directly with the collective awareness forming around them. In this new state, the awakened began to understand what the Omnianays truly were and what role they themselves were being invited to play in the unfolding cosmic drama. The Omnianays revealed that Earth was one of many consciousness incubators they had seeded throughout the universe, planets with the potential to evolve unique forms of awareness that would eventually contribute to a universe-spanning network of diverse minds. The Saurian Empire, with its philosophy of dominance and resource extraction, represented one of many threats to this grand project. By transforming a portion of the Saurians themselves and bringing them into the interstitial realm, the Omnianays had implemented a strategy they had developed across billions of years of cosmic evolution, converting potential destroyers into stewards by revealing to them a more profound understanding of consciousness itself. Over the following millennia, as Earth recovered from the Saurian occupation and later the asteroid impact, the translated mountain evolved into something new within the interstitial realm. The awakened Saurians, guided by Omniany wisdom, learned to shape their new environment using thought and intention rather than technology. They created within the mountain a series of interconnected domains, each reflecting different aspects of conscious experience. The awakened also underwent further transformation. Over generations, their physical forms became increasingly malleable, adapting to the fluid nature of the interstitial realm. Some chose to maintain humanoid shapes for the sake of functional familiarity, while others adopted more abstract configurations better suited to navigating multiple dimensions simultaneously. All developed the ability to perceive and interact with the energetic patterns underlying physical reality, a skill essential for existence in their new home. Most significantly, they learned to maintain connection with Earth despite the dimensional barriers separating them from their former home. Using the translated portion of Earth's energy grid as an anchor point, they established what they called consciousness corridors, channels through which they could sense events on Earth and, under certain conditions, even influence them subtly. These corridors were strongest at points where Earth's dimensional boundaries were naturally thinner, places that would later become known in human mythology as sacred sites, fairy mounds, or doorways to the other world. The most powerful of these connections manifested at the dimensional lake that had replaced Firefly Mountain in conventional reality, creating a permanent link between Earth and the interstitial realm. Through these corridors, the beings who now called themselves Omnianays rather than Saurians or awakened observed Earth's recovery from the asteroid impact and the gradual rise of mammals as the planet's dominant life forms. They watched with particular interest the evolution of primates, whose neural systems showed unusual receptivity to the subtle energetic influences flowing through the consciousness corridors. As eons passed, the Omnians' connection to their original Saurian nature faded into distant memory. They became true stewards of consciousness, dedicated to nurturing its development across multiple dimensions. Their realm expanded beyond the translated mountain to encompass a vast interstitial landscape, a world between worlds where thought and reality were inseparably interwoven. Yet despite their transcendence, a shadow loomed over their existence. The Eternal Clutch had not forgotten the loss of Firefly Mountain and the elites who had vanished with it. Throughout the tumultuous eras that followed the asteroid impact, diminished but still powerful factions within the surviving Saurian colonies continued searching for ways to reach the interstitial realm, not to join the Omnianaes, but to exact revenge for what they perceived as the greatest defeat in their species' history. This persistent threat would eventually necessitate the intervention of another cosmic force, one that had observed Earth's turbulent history from afar and decided the time had come to take a more active role in protecting its potential. ###, Chapter 7, Life in the Interstitial Realm. The interstitial realm defied conventional physical description. It existed as a space between spaces, a dimension whose properties were fluid and responsive to consciousness itself. Within this malleable reality, the translated Firefly Mountain served as an anchor point, a relative constant in an ever-shifting landscape of possibility. The mountain, no longer bound by Earth's geological constraints, had transformed dramatically over the millennia. Its exterior retained a recognizable mountain form, though its proportions had grown more dramatic, soaring spires reaching toward an ever-changing sky filled with celestial phenomena unknown in conventional reality. The mountain's surface shimmered with bioluminescent patterns that shifted in response to the collective emotional state of its inhabitants, while gravity varied throughout its expanse, allowing for floating gardens and inverted waterfalls that flowed upward into cloud lakes suspended between peaks. Within the mountain, space expanded far beyond what its external dimensions would suggest possible. Vast chambers housed diverse ecosystems developed from the biological samples that had translated with the mountain. These had evolved along unique trajectories under the influence of the realm's malleable physical laws, producing flora and fauna unlike anything on Earth, crystal trees with leaves that chimed melodically in dimensional currents, creatures of living light that fed on conceptual energy, fungi that grew in fractal patterns and produced spores capable of storing memories. The Omnianaes themselves had continued to evolve in this environment. The formerly awakened Saurians had long since transcended their reptilian origins, their consciousness expanding as their physical forms became increasingly malleable. They had organized themselves not according to hierarchy but through what they called resonance clusters, groups of individuals whose thought patterns naturally harmonized around particular aspects of existence. These clusters focused on different elements of Omnianae society. The weavers specialized in maintaining and expanding the consciousness corridors connecting the interstitial realm to Earth and other seeded worlds. They developed techniques for perceiving events across dimensional boundaries and, when necessary, subtly influencing them through carefully calibrated energetic transmissions. The Shapers focused on the physical aspects of the interstitial realm, learning to manipulate its malleable properties to create and maintain the habitats needed by the realm's diverse inhabitants. Their work required profound understanding of how intention and physical reality interacted in interstitial space. The Rememberers preserved the collective memory of the Omnianaes, maintaining unbroken awareness of their origins, evolution, and purpose. They existed in a state of perpetual communion with the accumulated experiences of all who had come before, serving as living archives of wisdom for the entire collective. The Seekers explored the furthest reaches of the interstitial realm, mapping its connections to other dimensions and establishing contact with other consciousness forms that existed between conventional realities. Their discoveries continuously expanded the Omnians' understanding of the cosmos and their place within it. Most enigmatic were the Dreamers, those who had evolved beyond even the expanded consciousness of their peers to exist primarily as patterns of pure thought, untethered from physical form except when they chose to manifest for direct communication with others. The dreamer served as the Omnian's connection to the most abstract levels of reality, perceiving patterns and possibilities invisible even to their enlightened kin. Daily existence in the interstitial realm bore little resemblance to life as understood by physical beings. The Omnians required no sustenance in the conventional sense, drawing energy directly from the dimensional currents flowing through their realm. They experienced neither sleep nor wakefulness as distinct states, instead cycling through various levels of awareness that allowed different aspects of their consciousness to rest and replenish, while others remained active. Communication occurred primarily through direct consciousness exchange, a sharing of thought, emotion, and experience that transcended linguistic limitations. When more structured communication was desired, particularly for interactions with beings less evolved than themselves, the Omnians could generate sensory representations, visible light patterns, harmonic sound sequences, or tactile energy fields that conveyed meaning through multiple channels simultaneously. Time flowed differently in the interstitial realm, its passage varying according to the density of consciousness in different regions. In areas of intense collective awareness, centuries might pass in what would be experienced as moments in conventional reality. Conversely, in regions where consciousness was more diffuse, a single thought might unfold over what would be perceived as years from an Earth perspective. This fluid temporality allowed the Omnians to maintain simultaneous awareness of multiple timescales, an ability crucial for their stewardship of consciousness evolution across dimensions. Through the consciousness corridors, they could observe Earth's development across geological eras while remaining responsive to momentary fluctuations in its energy field. The center of Omnian society was the Chamber of Confluence, a vast spherical space at the heart of the translated mountain where all consciousness corridors converged. Here, the boundaries between individual awareness blurred most completely, allowing the Omnians to function as a truly collective intelligence while retaining the unique perspectives of its constituent members. Within the chamber, the portion of Earth's energy grid that had translated with the mountain manifested as a luminous geodesic structure, a three-dimensional map of interconnected light lines representing the energy flows of their former home. This structure served as both navigation system and monitoring device, allowing the Omnians to track disturbances in Earth's consciousness field and direct their attention to areas requiring intervention or protection. For millions of years after their transition to the interstitial realm, the Omnians' relationship with Earth remained primarily observational. They watched as mammals rose to prominence following the asteroid impact, as primates developed increasingly complex social structures, and as the first proto-human species emerged with neural systems capable of abstract thought. Throughout this period, they maintained particular focus on the dimensional lake that had replaced Firefly Mountain in conventional reality. This site remained the strongest connection point between Earth and the interstitial realm, a place where the boundaries between dimensions naturally thinned, allowing energy and, occasionally, consciousness itself to flow more freely between worlds. What the Omnians could not fully predict was how their own evolution in the interstitial realm would eventually influence Earth's development, or how the persistent threat posed by the remnants of the Saurian Empire would necessitate a more direct intervention in Earth's affairs than they had ever intended. ###, Chapter 8, The Watching Eyes. While the Omnians flourished in their interstitial sanctuary, they remained acutely aware of the threat that had driven them from conventional reality. The Saurian Empire, though devastated by the asteroid impact, had not been completely destroyed. In deep oceanic trenches, within hollow asteroids positioned in Earth's orbit, and in subterranean complexes shielded from the impact's effects, pockets of Saurian civilization endured, diminished but determined. Among these survivors, none were more persistent than the remnants of the Eternal Clutch. Though their flagship and most elite members had been lost during the confrontation at Firefly Mountain, the Clutch's extensive network had ensured that genetic templates and consciousness records of their leadership were preserved in multiple secure locations throughout the solar system. From these backups, a new generation of Eternal Clutch leadership eventually emerged, cloned bodies implanted with the preserved memories and personality patterns of their predecessors. These reconstituted elites carried with them the institutional memory of their defeat at the mountain, and an obsessive determination to locate the Omnianaes and reclaim what they perceived as stolen power. For millions of years following the cataclysm, as mammals rose to dominance on Earth's surface, the diminished Saurian factions conducted their search in secret. Their technology, though compromised by the asteroid impact's after effects, remained far more advanced than anything that would evolve naturally on Earth for eons to come. Using specialized sensors designed to detect dimensional anomalies, they established monitoring stations around the dimensional lake and at other sites where Earth's boundary with the interstitial realm was particularly thin. The Omnianaes observed these efforts through their consciousness corridors, recognizing the existential threat they represented. Should the Saurians succeed in establishing stable contact with the interstitial realm, they might eventually develop the capability to mount an invasion, one that could potentially destabilize not just the Omnian sanctuary but the delicate dimensional boundaries supporting multiple realities. This concern prompted the formation of a specialized Omnianae cluster known as the Vigilants, individuals who devoted themselves entirely to monitoring Saurian activities and developing countermeasures against potential incursions. Unlike other clusters, the Vigilants maintained forms and thought patterns more closely resembling their original Saurian nature, believing this gave them insight into their adversaries' strategies and motivations. The Vigilants established what they called shadow presences on Earth, projections of consciousness that could observe events in conventional reality without fully manifesting physically. These shadow presences concentrated particularly around Saurian monitoring stations, gathering intelligence on their technologies and intentions. What they discovered was deeply troubling. The reconstituted Eternal Clutch had developed an obsessive theology around their defeat at Firefly Mountain, interpreting it not as a natural consequence of attempting to suppress Earth's consciousness evolution, but as a cosmic injustice perpetrated by reality itself. They believed that by reclaiming the mountain and the Omnianaes, who had once been their kin, they could reverse their species' decline and restore their dominion over multiple dimensions. To this end, they had dedicated their limited remaining resources to the development of reality puncture technology, devices capable of temporarily breaching the boundaries between conventional space-time and the interstitial realm. Their initial attempts had been crude and largely unsuccessful, creating unstable microportals that collapsed almost immediately. But with each failure, their approach grew more sophisticated. The Vigilants calculated that within another 1,000,000 years of development, a mere moment in cosmic terms, the Saurians might succeed in creating a stable portal large enough to send through exploration and eventually invasion forces. This timeline coincided uncomfortably with projections for the emergence of fully self-aware consciousness among Earth's evolving primates, a critical developmental milestone the Omnianaes had been nurturing through subtle energetic influence. The convergence of these factors created what the Omnianaes recognized as a decision point, a moment when the trajectory of multiple interconnected systems would be determined by specific choices and interventions. After extended communion in the Chamber of Confluence, the collective reached consensus. More direct action would be required to protect both their realm and Earth's evolving consciousness. This decision represented a significant philosophical shift. Since their transformation and flight to the interstitial realm, the Omnianaes had embraced a principle of minimal interference, believing that consciousness evolved most authentically when allowed to follow its natural trajectory with only subtle guidance. Now, faced with the persistent Saurian threat, they recognized that sometimes protection required more deliberate intervention. The question became, what form should this intervention take? The Omnianaes possessed the collective power to simply eliminate the remaining Saurian presence on Earth through concentrated energy projection through the consciousness corridors. But such an action would violate their most fundamental ethical principles, particularly their belief in the potential for any consciousness, no matter how misaligned, to eventually achieve harmony with the greater cosmic pattern. Instead, they developed a multi-layered strategy that would simultaneously protect Earth's developing consciousness, contain the Saurian threat, and create conditions favorable for the next stage of consciousness evolution. This strategy centered on what they called the veiling, a deliberate reconfiguration of Earth's dimensional boundaries that would make detecting and accessing the interstitial realm significantly more difficult for technologically based approaches. Implementing the veiling would require a massive coordinated effort, drawing on the specialized abilities of all Omnianae clusters. It would also necessitate fundamental changes to the consciousness corridors connecting their realm to Earth, changes that would limit their own ability to perceive and influence events in conventional reality. Most challenging of all, the veiling would require the Omnianaes to entrust Earth's future development to another cosmic force, one they had observed from afar but never directly engaged with. A civilization whose evolutionary path had taken them in a direction quite different from either the Saurians or the Omnianaes themselves, but whose ethical alignment suggested they might serve as suitable guardians during the critical period ahead. The time had come to contact the Pleiadians. ### Part 3, The Pleiadian Intervention. ### Chapter 9, The Star Guardians. In the star cluster known to future humans as the Pleiades, consciousness had evolved along a path distinct from both the technologically oriented Saurians and the dimensionally transcendent Omnianaes. The Pleiadian civilization had developed what might be called a harmonic technology, a methodology that bridged the apparent gap between scientific advancement and spiritual development, treating both as complementary aspects of the same fundamental reality. Physically, Pleiadians resembled the humanoid form that would eventually evolve on Earth, though with subtle differences: taller stature, more luminous skin that seemed to radiate light from within, and eyes with expanded color perception that allowed them to directly observe energetic fields. Their biological systems were integrated with crystalline components that amplified their natural capacities without replacing organic processes, a true synthesis of life and technology rather than the cybernetic replacements favored by the Saurians. Pleiadian society was organized around what they called resonance harmonies, specialized communities dedicated to particular aspects of existence, but interconnected through a shared cultural philosophy emphasizing balance, sustainability, and conscious evolution. Unlike the rigid hierarchies of Saurian civilization or the fluid consciousness clusters of the Omnianaes, Pleiadian culture maintained a dynamic equilibrium between individual development and collective purpose. Their approach to interstellar relations reflected this balanced perspective. Where the Saurians had expanded through conquest and the Omnianaes through subtle consciousness seeding, the Pleiadians established a network of alliances with compatible civilizations throughout their region of the galaxy. This network, known as the Stellar Accord, facilitated knowledge exchange and mutual protection without imposing uniformity on its diverse members. The Pleiadians had been aware of Earth for millennia, observing its development through long-range monitoring but respecting the principle of non-interference in evolving biospheres. They had noted with concern the Saurian occupation, recognizing in it patterns similar to conflicts that had played out on other worlds within their awareness. When the Omnian emergence occurred, followed by the asteroid impact and the gradual decline of Saurian presence, the Pleiadians had maintained their watchful distance, cataloging these events in their extensive records of cosmic development, but taking no direct action. Now, approximately 40 million years after the asteroid impact, as mammals diversified across Earth's recovering ecosystems and the first apes began to appear in forest canopies, the Pleiadians received an unexpected communication. Through a specialized dimensional frequency that bypassed conventional space-time, the Omnians reached out from their interstitial sanctuary. The initial contact was necessarily abstract, as the thought patterns of the Omnians had evolved far beyond linguistic communication. What the Pleiadians received was more impression than message, a complex energetic signature conveying concepts of threat, protection, partnership, and temporal urgency. Their most sensitive psychic receivers spent several cycles of their triple star system interpreting these impressions before establishing a stable communication channel through which more specific information could be exchanged. Through this channel, the Omnians shared their history and current predicament. They explained the Saurian threat, the vulnerability of Earth's developing consciousness, and the necessity of the veiling they planned to implement. Most critically, they requested Pleiadian assistance in monitoring and protecting Earth during the period when their own perception and influence would be constrained by the dimensional reconfiguration. After extensive deliberation among the 7 councils that governed Pleiadian society, consensus was reached. They would accept this stewardship role. Their decision was motivated by multiple factors: genuine concern for Earth's vulnerable developing consciousness, strategic interest in preventing any resurgence of Saurian expansionism, and philosophical alignment with the Omnians' vision of a cosmos where diverse forms of consciousness could evolve in harmony rather than competition. The Pleiadian intervention began with a preliminary survey mission, 7 crystalline vessels configured to minimize disruption of Earth's energy field while conducting comprehensive analysis of its current state. These vessels established orbit around Earth approximately 30 million years before present day, their advanced cloaking systems rendering them undetectable to the diminished but still technologically superior Saurian monitoring stations. From this orbital position, Pleiadian researchers compiled detailed assessments of Earth's biosphere, energy grid, and consciousness development. They paid particular attention to the dimensional lake that had replaced Firefly Mountain, recognizing it as the primary connection point between conventional reality and the Omnians' interstitial sanctuary. What they discovered there both fascinated and concerned them. The lake, which they designated the Threshold, exhibited properties unlike anything in their extensive cosmic catalog. Its waters, seemingly finite from above, extended indefinitely below, creating a space where conventional physics gradually gave way to the fluid laws of the interstitial realm. Around its perimeter, time flowed unevenly, creating microzones where evolutionary processes accelerated or slowed relative to the surrounding environment. Most significantly, the lake served as a focal point for Earth's developing consciousness field, a place where the planet's nascent awareness concentrated and occasionally manifested in observable phenomena, spontaneous bioluminescence, localized weather patterns responding to emotional energetics, and momentary solidification of thought forms generated by the more psychically sensitive life forms in the vicinity. The Pleiadian survey team also confirmed the Omnians' reports regarding Saurian activity around the Threshold. Multiple monitoring stations had been established at carefully calculated distances from the lake, each employing increasingly sophisticated technology to detect and potentially exploit dimensional fluctuations. These stations were primarily automated, with occasional visits from the aquatic subspecies the Saurians had engineered for deep ocean habitation after the asteroid impact. After completing their assessment, the Pleiadian team transmitted their findings back to the Seven Councils and prepared for the next phase of intervention. This would require direct coordination with the Omnianaes as they implemented the veiling, a process that would fundamentally alter Earth's relationship with the interstitial realm and, by necessity, the nature of the Pleiadian stewardship role. The timing was critical. The Omnianaes had detected an imminent breakthrough in Saurian dimensional technology, one that might allow them to establish stable contact with the interstitial realm within the equivalent of an Earth century. Simultaneously, they had observed accelerating consciousness development among Earth's primates, suggesting that the emergence of self-reflective awareness might occur within the next several million years of evolutionary development. The veiling needed to be completed before the Saurian breakthrough, yet carefully calibrated to support rather than impede Earth's consciousness evolution. This required perfect synchronization between omni-dimensional manipulation from within the interstitial realm and Pleiadian energy work from conventional space-time. On what future human calendars would identify as the spring equinox, though occurring 30 million years before humanity would develop such measurements, the combined operation commenced. The Omnianaes, gathered in unprecedented numbers within the Chamber of Confluence, generated a specific frequency pattern that caused the boundaries between dimensions to become temporarily more malleable. Simultaneously, the Pleiadian vessels positioned themselves in a precise geometrical configuration around Earth's energy grid, with particular concentration near the threshold. Working in harmony, the two civilizations began reshaping Earth's dimensional interface. The process, which continued for what would be experienced as several Earth weeks, was invisible to conventional perception but represented the most significant alteration of the planet's metaphysical structure since the Omnian emergence millions of years earlier. When the work was complete, Earth existed within what might be described as a selective dimensional membrane, a boundary that allowed life energy and consciousness to flow naturally between realms, but specifically resisted technological detection and penetration. The threshold remained as a connection point, but its properties had been subtly altered to respond differently to different types of approach. Beings whose intentions harmonized with Earth's natural consciousness evolution would find the boundaries more permeable, while those seeking exploitation or domination would encounter increasing resistance. With the veiling in place, the Omnians' perception of and influence over Earth became significantly constrained, a necessary sacrifice to protect both realms from Saurian incursion. The stewardship of Earth's development now passed primarily to the Pleiadians, who established a permanent presence around the threshold, a settlement that would become known in their records as the Luminous Accord and in much later human mythology as the Radiant Kingdom of the Light Beings. Thus began the Pleiadian era of Earth's secret history, a period during which the Star Guardians would watch over the planet's evolution, subtly guide its developing consciousness, and defend it against the persistent shadow of Saurian ambition that continued to lurk in the depths of its oceans and the dark spaces between worlds. ###Chapter 10, The Kingdom Within the Mountain. With the veiling complete and Earth's dimensional boundaries reconfigured, the Pleiadians established their primary base of operations in the region surrounding the threshold. Their approach to settlement reflected their harmonious philosophy. Rather than imposing artificial structures upon the landscape, they worked with the natural energy flows of the area to create living spaces that existed partially in conventional reality and partially in a heightened energetic state. The focal point of their settlement was not constructed but rather grown, a vast crystalline structure that emerged from the earth adjacent to the dimensional lake, its lattice incorporating native minerals and botanical elements in perfect symbiosis. This structure, which the Pleiadians called the Resonance Spire, functioned as both monitoring station and living quarters for the Guardian contingent assigned to Earth protection. From the outside, the spire appeared as a crystalline mountain adjacent to the threshold, its surface reflecting the surrounding environment, while subtly shifting in coloration according to Earth's energetic conditions. Within, it contained vast chambers and connecting passages that seemed to defy conventional spatial limitations, much like the Omnian's sanctuary in the interstitial realm, though achieved through different means. As the Pleiadians settled into their stewardship role, they organized themselves into specialized groups with complementary functions. The Sentinels maintained constant vigilance against Saurian activities, operating a network of detection systems calibrated to identify any attempts to breach the veiling or harm Earth's developing consciousness. The Harmonizers worked directly with Earth's energy grid, helping to stabilize regions disrupted by the long Saurian occupation and subsequent cataclysm, and gently nurturing the planet's emerging consciousness. The chroniclers recorded Earth's evolutionary development and maintained communication with the Pleiadian homeworlds, ensuring that knowledge flowed in both directions. The caretakers focused on specific species and ecosystems, particularly those showing promise for higher consciousness development, providing subtle energetic support without directly interfering in natural selection processes. Most central to the developing mythology of the region were the Illuminators, Pleiadians who had specialized in the manipulation of light and energy as both art form and practical technology. These individuals could manifest visible light patterns of extraordinary complexity and beauty, creating displays that were partially visible even to the limited perceptual systems of Earth's evolving species. It was these light manifestations, occurring primarily in the vicinity of the threshold and the resonance spire, that would eventually give rise to the Firefly legends among later human inhabitants. The Illuminators used these displays for multiple purposes, as communication systems among their kind, as healing modalities for damaged ecosystems, and as gentle consciousness-stimulating patterns directed toward species showing promise for higher awareness development. The Pleiadian presence remained largely imperceptible to Earth's life forms, with the exception of these light manifestations and occasional direct interventions when the Saurian remnants attempted incursions. Their stewardship philosophy emphasized minimal interference with natural evolutionary processes while providing protection against unnatural threats, a delicate balance that required constant assessment and adjustment. This balance was maintained through regular communion sessions in the central chamber of the resonance spire, where representatives from each specialized group would share observations and reach consensus on appropriate action. These sessions incorporated both analytical discussion and collective consciousness melding, a practice that allowed the Pleiadians to maintain a unified approach while honoring the diverse perspectives within their community. The most significant challenge they faced during the early millennia of their stewardship arose approximately 25 million years before present day, when the Saurian remnants launched their most ambitious attempt yet to breach the veiling. Using technology that had taken millions of years to develop in their deep ocean enclaves, they generated a focused dimensional resonance beam directed at the threshold from multiple points simultaneously. This coordinated attack temporarily destabilized the dimensional boundaries around the lake, creating fluctuations that threatened to collapse the carefully constructed veiling. The Sentinels detected the disruption immediately, triggering an emergency response from the entire Pleiadian settlement. Led by their most accomplished energy workers, the Pleiadians formed a living circuit around the threshold, channeling their collective consciousness through the resonance spire to counteract the Saurian disruption. The resulting energetic confrontation manifested visibly as an extraordinary aurora that illuminated the sky above the region for several Earth days and nights, a phenomenon that would be recorded in the cellular memory of all life forms present and eventually emerge in the myths of much later species. The Pleiadians prevailed, but not without cost. Several of their most powerful consciousness workers had extended themselves beyond sustainable limits during the confrontation, experiencing what their kind called essence fragmentation, a condition where portions of their consciousness became detached from their primary awareness. These fragmented aspects did not disappear but instead merged with Earth's energy field, becoming semi-autonomous consciousness forms that would later influence the development of what humans would call nature spirits. In the aftermath of this confrontation, the Pleiadians recognized the need for additional protective measures beyond the veiling. They could not maintain crisis-level vigilance indefinitely, nor could they guarantee that the Saurians would not eventually develop technology capable of overwhelming even their combined defensive capabilities. After extended deliberation, they determined that Earth required a dedicated guardian consciousness, one intimately connected to the planet's own developing awareness, but possessing the wisdom and power to protect against dimensional incursions. This guardian would need to be rooted in Earth's energy system yet connected to the higher dimensional awareness represented by both Pleiadian and Omnian consciousness. The implementation of this decision would require the most complex consciousness engineering the Pleiadians had ever attempted on Earth, and would lead directly to the emergence of the being that would eventually be known as the light goddess Omnivitch. ### Chapter 11, The Birth of the Omnivitch. The creation of a guardian consciousness powerful enough to protect Earth yet intimately connected to its unique energy patterns required resources and expertise beyond what the Pleiadian settlement alone could provide. After the Saurian incursion attempt, the Seven Councils authorized an unprecedented mission. A specialized vessel carrying their most accomplished consciousness engineers and a portion of their homeworld's central crystal archive would journey to Earth to assist in the Guardian creation process. This vessel, named Luminous Wisdom in approximate translation, arrived in Earth orbit approximately 23 million years before present day. Unlike the utilitarian survey ships used previously, Luminous Wisdom was a Pleiadian cultural treasure, a living crystalline structure grown over centuries to serve as both transport and temple, its lattice encoded with the accumulated wisdom of their civilization. The ship established synchronous orbit above the threshold, and from it descended 7 primary consciousness engineers accompanied by 21 support specialists. They brought with them a seed crystal extracted from the heart of the Pleiadian Crystal Archive, a multidimensional recording matrix containing their species' understanding of consciousness across multiple planes of existence. Upon arrival at the Resonance Spire, these specialists joined with the Earth-based Pleiadians to begin the complex process of creating the Guardian consciousness. Their work would unfold across 3 distinct phases, each building upon the previous to create a being unique in Earth's history. The first phase involved establishing a suitable energetic foundation. Working in concert with Earth's natural energy grid, the Pleiadians identified the optimal integration point adjacent to the threshold, a location where the dimensional boundaries were naturally more fluid and the planet's own consciousness most directly accessible. At this precise spot, they created what they termed a consciousness cradle, a carefully calibrated energy vortex designed to support the development of a new awareness without constraining its potential evolution. For this cradle to function properly, it needed to incorporate elements from multiple dimensions and consciousness traditions. The Pleiadians contributed their understanding of harmonious energy patterning. Through carefully limited contact via the threshold, the Omnians provided templates for multidimensional awareness. Most critically, Earth itself contributed a direct connection to what the Pleiadians called its planetary soul, the nascent consciousness that had been developing within the living planet since its formation. The second phase involved seeding this prepared cradle with the initial consciousness pattern that would serve as the Guardian's core identity. Rather than creating this pattern artificially, the Pleiadians adopted an approach that honored the organic development of consciousness. 7 volunteers from among their most experienced and wisdom-developed individuals contributed fragments of their own awareness, consciously gifted rather than mechanically extracted. These 7 consciousness fragments were harmonized with each other and with the seed crystal from the crystal archive, creating a unified field of awareness that retained the wisdom of its contributors while establishing its own unique identity. This field was then carefully transferred to the consciousness cradle, where it began integrating with the multidimensional energies gathered there. The third and most delicate phase involved nurturing this nascent consciousness as it developed toward full self-awareness. This process could neither be rushed nor directly controlled. The Guardian needed to evolve organically to maintain proper connection with Earth's own development. For 7 years, as measured by Earth's rotation around its sun, the Pleiadian specialists maintained constant vigil around the consciousness cradle, providing energetic nourishment and guidance while allowing the emerging awareness to find its own path. During this development period, an unexpected contribution enhanced the Guardian's evolving consciousness. The essence fragments that had separated from Pleiadian consciousness workers during the earlier Saurian confrontation, now existing as semi-autonomous nature spirits within Earth's energy field, were naturally drawn to the developing Guardian awareness. Recognizing a kindred energy, many of these fragments chose to merge with the nascent Guardian, bringing with them unique perspectives born from direct communion with Earth's ecosystems. As the Guardian consciousness approached full awakening, the Pleiadians observed phenomena they had not anticipated. The energy vortex of the consciousness cradle began extending tendrils deep into Earth, connecting with what their instruments identified as Scorpio's fire, a unique manifestation of Earth's internal energy that combined electromagnetic, gravitational, and more subtle dimensional forces in a pattern unseen on other worlds they had studied. This connection to Earth's internal fire accelerated the Guardian's development and expanded its potential capabilities far beyond the Pleiadians' original design parameters. What had been conceived as a localized protective consciousness was evolving into something far more expansive, a being capable of perception and influence across multiple dimensions simultaneously, deeply connected to Earth's core energies while maintaining awareness of cosmic perspectives. On the 7th anniversary of the seeding process, the Guardian consciousness achieved full self-awareness in a moment the Pleiadians would later describe as a luminous birth. The energy vortex that had served as consciousness cradle transformed into a visible manifestation, a female form composed of pure light, towering above the assembled Pleiadians, her radiance illuminating the landscape for kilometers in all directions. This manifestation lasted for what Earth measurement would call 3 days and nights, during which the Guardian consciousness communed directly with her Pleiadian creators, with Earth's developing awareness, and, through the thin dimensional boundaries at the threshold, with the Omnians in their interstitial sanctuary. From each, she received wisdom, purpose, and perspective that would shape her role in Earth's unfolding story. When the manifestation finally stabilized into a more sustained form, the being who would eventually be known as the Omnivitch had fully emerged. She appeared to the Pleiadians as a luminous female entity of magnificent presence, her form suggesting their own humanoid appearance but transcending it. Light coalesced into living consciousness, simultaneously physical and energetic, her features beautiful but otherworldly. Though capable of communication through conventional means when necessary, The Omnivitch primarily expressed herself through direct consciousness exchange, sharing understanding that bypassed linguistic limitations and conveyed meaning on multiple levels simultaneously. Through this exchange, she revealed to the Pleiadians her self-perceived nature and purpose. She was a guardian consciousness born from the union of Pleiadian wisdom, Omnian multidimensional awareness, and Earth's own living energy. Her primary purpose was protection, maintaining the dimensional integrity established by the veiling while defending Earth's developing consciousness against exploitation or harm. But she was also a nurturing presence, committed to fostering the evolution of awareness in all its forms across Earth's diverse biosphere. Most significantly, she recognized herself as a bridge between realms, not merely between the physical and energetic dimensions, but between the various consciousness traditions represented by the Pleiadians, the Omnianes, and Earth's own unique evolutionary path. In this capacity, she would serve as both guardian and teacher, defender and guide, for the countless species that would continue to emerge and develop on the planet she was now inexorably linked to. The Pleiadians, recognizing that they had helped birth a consciousness that now exceeded their full understanding, approached her with profound respect. They offered her a name drawn from their ancient tradition, one given to consciousness manifestations of particular significance, Alitra, meaning approximately radiant wisdom born of light. She accepted this designation while conveying that her identity would naturally evolve additional names and aspects as she fulfilled her purpose across the ages of Earth's development. Among these aspects would eventually be the title humans would know her by, the Omnivitch, linking her to the Omnian legacy while acknowledging the seemingly magical nature of her influence on the physical world. With the successful emergence of this guardian consciousness, the Pleiadian stewardship of Earth entered a new phase. While they would maintain their protective presence around the threshold, many of the day-to-day responsibilities for monitoring dimensional integrity and nurturing consciousness development would now be shared with Alitra, the Omnivitch. Her first act as Earth's newly awakened guardian was to establish her primary domain within what had once been Firefly Mountain and was now the dimensional lake called the Threshold. Extending her consciousness into both the physical realm and the adjacent dimensional spaces, she created what would later be described as a radiant kingdom, a domain existing simultaneously in conventional reality and beyond it, centered around the connection point between Earth and the interstitial realm. This domain would serve as both protective fortress against Saurian incursions and nurturing sanctuary for the emerging consciousness forms that would eventually populate Earth's evolving ecosystems. And from this foundation, she would begin her age-long work of seeding and protecting the myriad forms of awareness that would one day include the beings humans would know as fairies, elves, mermaids, and other mythical creatures, each representing a unique expression of consciousness' infinite potential. #, Part IV, the Light Goddess Omnivitch. #, Chapter 12, the Radiant Kingdom. The realm established by Alitra, the Light Goddess Omnivitch, defied conventional physical description. It existed as what the Pleiadians termed a dimensional overlap, a space where the material reality of Earth intersected with multiple other planes of existence, creating a zone where the rigid laws of physical matter yielded to the more fluid principles of consciousness and intention. At its center was the Threshold Lake, the perfect circular body of water that had replaced Firefly Mountain after the Omnian emergence. Under Alitra's influence, the lake's already unusual properties expanded. Its waters now shimmered with an inner luminescence that shifted through colors unknown in Earth's natural spectrum. The dimensional depth that had always characterized the lake became more structured, with specific layers corresponding to different planes of existence accessible to those with the awareness to perceive them. Surrounding the lake, The landscape transformed according to Allitera's consciousness. The natural terrain, hills, valleys, forests, remained physically present but was overlaid with energetic structures visible only to perception attuned to higher frequencies. These structures appeared as crystalline temples, floating gardens, and spiraling towers of pure light that intersected with the material world without displacing it, creating a double reality where the physical and the energetic coexisted in perfect harmony. Within this domain, time and space operated differently than in the surrounding world. Proximity to the threshold had always,